Greetings of the day, my dear friends. This is Chax once again with a new episode of ChaxSimplifies. This time, let's take a look at the South China Sea. The South China Sea is an area just south of China and north of Indonesia. Its critical importance lies in the fact that 33% of the globe's shipping, that is over $5.3 trillion worth of international trade, passes through this area. Over 80% of China's oil imports pass through the Straits of Malacca, Indonesia, and then sail into the South China Sea en route to China. This area is home to over $11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, as estimated by the US Department of Energy. The Chinese estimations are incidentally over 10 times this. 125 billion barrels of oil, over 500 trillion cubic feet of gas. Contrast this with the total Chinese consumption of 4.5 billion barrels of oil on an annual basis. You will realize that this area can give decades of oil to China. Over 10% of the world's fish live and thrive here. To cap it all, the US is a major player here despite not having a shore. That's because it has defense treaties with Philippines, Singapore, Japan. Right? So very obviously this area is important. China claims this entire South China Sea as its own private property, and it bases it on historical records of the Xi and the Han dynasties. Well, these dynasties, they say, were over 2000 years back, and Chinese claim they ruled over this area. In 1947, even before China became independent, right, Chaing Kai Shek drew 11 dashes encompassing the entire South China Sea. This was called the 11-dash line. Well, because the bonhomie between the two communists, that is North Vietnam and China, 2 of these dashes were removed, and therefore this line now has only 9 dashes and is called the 9-dash line. Vietnam, on the other hand, has claims that it has historical claims, but it dates to the 17th century. The other littoral states, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and Philippines, claim significant parts of the South China Sea based on the UNCLOS treaty, which says that territorial waters extend to 12 nautical miles from the baseline, and the exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, for 200 nautical miles. Essentially, now you can see there are 2 things or 2 basic issues that one can see here. One of trade, territory, and sovereignty. The other limited basically to the Spratly and the Paracel Islands. Well, the trade is self-explanatory. $5.3 trillion of shipping goes around out here. 10% of fishes, global fishes. Significant oil and gas, all of it unexplored. No prices for guessing the region, right? On top of it, China now, because it has become a modern, advanced country, and just as an aside, you'll be surprised, over 60% of patents filed under the 5G have been filed by Chinese companies. So you can imagine the status of China now, or its need for self-esteem. On the other hand, the Paracel and Spratly Islands are so located that anyone who controls them can control the ingress and egress from South China Sea. thereby control shipping and thereby control trade. Okay, important area, fantastic resources. So what's happening around? What happened till now? Till the Second World War, surprisingly, nothing happened. Nothing really happened. Right? It was only in 1946-47 under Chaing Kai Shek that some of these larger places in the spotlights, China began to send people in and built temporary sheds. Well, when the Chinese Civil War started in 1947, these islands were vacated. The neighboring states, that is basically Vietnam and Philippines, replaced the Chinese there. Till 1974, it was by and large status quo, nothing really happening here. But suddenly, in 1974, China and South Vietnam had a battle for the Paracel Islands to wrest control of the islands. China won. In 1988, China moved in a big way into the Spratly Islands and defended the Johnson Reef from Vietnam. In 1995, China built bunkers above the Mischief Reef. All this time, China continued publicly with the posture that hey, this is a peaceful rise of China. Nobody has to feel scared of the Chinese intentions because our intentions are noble and peaceful. Let us solve today's problems and let the next generation take charge of the problems that we cannot handle. In 2002, China realized that the bilateral route was not working and it could not come to peace. So it started negotiating with ASEAN as a bloc and said, let's create a declaration for conduct of parties in the South China Sea. Well, this conduct of parties did not really happen. And in May 2009, Malaysia and Vietnam sent a joint submission to the South China Sea Tribunal to work on the limits of their EEZ. China at this time pulled a rabbit out of its hat. The rabbit was a 9-line and said, hey, this is a bilateral issue because this is basically Chinese territory and therefore the tribunal has no right to determine. In 2012, China and Philippines had a standoff at the Scarborough Fair. At the Scarborough Shoal, China blocked all Philippine access and actually was starving the Philippines fishermen in that area. Right? China wrested control, Philippines withdrew, but on 22nd Jan 2013, Philippines approached the South China Sea Tribunal under UNCLOS. On 19 Feb, no prizes for guessing, China rejected this tribunal and said, I will not participate. On 12th of July 2016, a historic declaration, a historic decision was reached by the tribunal. It rejected all Chinese claims and said China has no historic claim and the 9-line, well, you can take a walk. It totally rejected Chinese claims that some of these reefs which China had in its possession on the Spratly Islands were entitled to EEZ and said these are just rocks and not inhabitable. It determined the Chinese actions as unlawful and in violation of the sovereign rights of Philippines over the blockage of the Scarborough Shoal, and it said very clearly China is doing the environment grave harm by creating artificial islands. So what happened? Well, no prizes. And once again, for guessing, China rejected this, saying this is an interference in its internal matters. Because, don't forget, China said the South China Sea is its backyard. It dramatically upped the ante and the construction activity of the artificial islands. There are 7 such islands, but if I give you one example only of the Ferry Cross Island, you'll be surprised of the facilities that are there. It didn't exist in 2014. By the end of 2016, there was a 10,000 feet runway which could have aircraft, fighter aircraft. It had radars, anti-aircraft guns, missiles, surface-to-surface missile batteries, a naval base with jetties, and hey, if you forget, allowed tourism. Chinese nationals could come here and spend a weekend or two. Right? China tried its best over the years to break the ASEAN unity and to some extent succeeded when it managed to pull Philippines, and the Philippine president declared just recently that it was willing to go beyond the tribunal award in return for a joint oil exploration near the Reed Bank. And of course, 60% of the oil and gas found there. China went on and declared an air identification zone, otherwise called the ADIS, and said, hey, this is not a military issue, this is for safety. But every aircraft that passes over the South China Sea will have to declare itself to us. Steve Bannon, the chief strategist in the White House, did mention just over a year back, we can go to war over the South China Sea, and in just 5 to 10 years only. Not surprising, the US and the Western world did not accept it. But there are a few lessons one must learn from here and understand how China works. Chinese genuinely believe in what they call as the creeping diplomacy. They take a large number of small, inconsequential steps, which can be rolled back with no loss of face. It actually blindsides the opposition. Therefore, even before the person realizes what has happened, there's already something big which is there, and you can do nothing about it. In the early years of the growth of China, of the rise of China, they always said, this is a peaceful rise. We are a peaceful nation. We only believe in trade. We have no military intentions. It's only recently that China, after having grown economically and militarily at the same time, has started getting into an aggressive posture and starting to dictate terms as far as the other countries are concerned. On the other hand, you realize that when China was doing all this and showing its muscles, there was significant pushback. The Pacific Command of the US is now renamed Indo-Pacific. Basically, it highlights that there is a role as far as India is concerned. A loose grouping called Quad, which is Japan, Australia, US and India, has been formed, and in their last meeting in September 2019, they came up and said there must be a rule-based order in the South China Sea. For the last 3 months, there has been a standoff with China as far as Vietnam is concerned. Right? The Chinese survey ship entered Vietnamese EEZ, and the Vietnam responded with Coast Guard ships. This standoff continues. You can see there is a power play here. A power play in which India is right in the center, and India has to do a tough balancing act. The US on one side, we are a strategic partner there as on today. On the other hand, there is China, and we for long have been, well, how should I put it, very mindful of whatever are our interests with China and not ruffle Chinese feathers, and Russia. Right? Effectively, we are in for very interesting times as we go along. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure bringing this episode to you. I look forward to your comments, your suggestions and ideas for my next. Thank you very much. As usual, share, comment this post of mine. Thank you.